Welcome back. We've nearly come to the end of our transformation now. So the only things left to do is to select the fields we need to write to our output file and then have a transformation to write that data to the file. So in order to do that, you'll need a combination of a select and a sync transformation. You can do everything in the sync transformation, but that's not the recommended approach. So go with the select to select the fields we want to select and write all of them to a sync. Just to aid you with what we need, let's have a relook our requirements. So the fields we want are in here, so that'll be the country, country code, 2-digit, 3-digit population reported date and the 2 counts and the source for the daily file in that order, and for the weekly file, it is pretty much the same, except that you've got the reported year week and instead of the reported date and then the week start date, end date, and the 2 counts are slightly different to the other one. So I would like you to have a go at building these select and the sync transformations and come back to the video if you get stuck. But good luck with that in the meantime. I'll see you shortly. Hope you managed to complete the assignment successfully. I'll now show you how I would go about approaching this problem. Let's switch over to Data Factory and get started. Okay, let's start with the weekly file. So let's create a select transformation for that. So that would be select day, weekly. And with that, we want to select the country, country code, 2-digit, 3-digit population. And we want the reported year, week, and the next 2 fields we wanted will be reported week start date and end date. I'm missing those 2 here. That could be because I didn't carry them through previously. So that's not here. And let's have a look in this. And that's not here either. So we joined the data and we got the big start date and end date, but we didn't carry forward. So that is missing in the group right here. So let's go and fix that first. So I want to add 2 new fields here. And the first one is the week start date and the next one would be the week end date. So yep. So that's my mistake. Sorry about that. So let's take that forward now. So we should be able to see everything now. So if I just do a reset, we see the data. So we got the country, country code, 2-digit, 3-digit population reported, year, week, and this one we wanted to call it as reported week start date, and this one would be called reported week end date. So let's do that. And we wanted to have the counts. But before that we will arrange the order of the column. So we need to drag the source at last to get it aligned with our discussed design. So let's do that. And the counts were going to be named slightly different. So this was going to be called New Hospital Occupancy Count. And the counts were going to be named slightly different. So this was going to be called New Hospital Occupancy Count, and this one would be called New ICU Occupancy Count. Okay, and that's so we've got our data as we expected. So let's have a look in the inspect metadata, and everything looks as we would expect. And let's do the same thing for our daily file. I'm going to call that one a select daily. And let's try that over. I don't think we would have made the same error here, because it's a different date. So we got the country, country code, 2-digit, 3-digit population, and then we got the reported date, and we want to have the source as the last column. And this was going to be called Hospital Occupancy Count. So this is already a daily file, so we don't need to call the field name with the daily, so we could get with that. And we were going to call this one as ICU Occupancy Count. So all of that is done here as well. So let's have a look at the inspect data metadata. So that looks okay as well. And now we need to create 2 syncs. So let's start with the weekly. So I'm going to call a sync, so that is going to be called a sync, weekly sync, and that's coming from the select weekly. The sync type is a dataset as we've discussed previously. We want to write the file to Data Lake Storage Gen 2, so we need a new dataset here. So that is going to be Data Lake Storage Gen 2, and we want to write a delimited text. So we could write a Parquet file that is commonly used within data lakes, because that's more performance that is a column, a data type. But for us, actually, we want to look at the data as part of this exercise. So we'll leave it as CSV so that it's easier to examine the data first. And we are not dealing with huge amount of data here either. So click Continue, and I'm going to call this as DS Processed Hospital Admissions Weekly. Let me copy that. It'll be useful for later. And the link service is the one we've already used, and we want a file paths. So that's going to go into Processed and ECDC. And here, if you remember, we need to have folders rather than files, because Spark's going to write the data and it expects folders to be there, because it works on partitioning. So we are going to call this as Hospital Admissions Weekly. And we want to have the first row as the header. And there is no schema at the import, there are no files at the moment, so let's leave it as none and click OK. So that should be that. We got the data set created here as well. And we want to create the daily sync now. So let's create a sync, and I'm going to call this one as Daily Sync, and again, this is coming from the Select Daily, and we want to create a new data set for that one. So click New, and we want to pick a Data Lake Gen 2 storage, and it's a delimited file, and we are going to call this as Daily. So that would be called DS Processed Hospital Admission Daily. And this is going to be in a Data Lake Storage Gen 2 link service. And let's browse to the file part, so that would be Processed ECDC. And again, we want to give a folder for that one. So that would be called Hospital Admissions Daily. Okay, so we want to keep the first row as the header, and we don't have a schema for that either. So let's click OK. So with that, we've finished everything we needed to do, I think. So let's just have a quick look at the data preview for these ones before we put it into pipelines. Okay, the refresh is now finished and the data looks as we would expect. So we got the most recent data on the top. And let's do the same thing for the weekly. Okay, so the data refresh is now finished and we got the most recent data for Belgium. As we know, actually, we've only got Belgium data for weekly, not the Austrian data. So we're only seeing one country here. But when we have the data written to the files, we'll see all of the data. As you probably guessed, actually debug doesn't write the data to the files. We're only seeing the data here. But in order to write the files, we need to invoke the data flow from a pipeline so that it writes the data. So we've finished creating the data flow here. It's a good time to publish all the changes to the data factory, so we don't lose any of those changes. So that's the end of this session. In the next session, we'll create a pipeline to invoke our data flow so that the files are written to the data lake and we can examine the files to make sure that our logic has worked and we've successfully created the transformation as we expected.